Evelyn Harper had always believed that love was measured by how much one could give without expecting anything in return. For nearly 70 years, she had lived by that rule, first as a daughter, then as a wife, and later as a mother. Her days were marked by lists, groceries to buy, bills to pay, things to fix. She had spent decades making her home a sanctuary for others, though no one ever thought to ask if it was a sanctuary for her. When her husband, Thomas, died 15 years ago, everyone said she was strong, that she would manage fine on her own. And she did. She managed the silence, the empty chair at dinner, the birthdays where her daughter, Rachel, promised she'd visit but never came. Evelyn learned to talk to herself in the kitchen while chopping vegetables because the quiet felt too sharp otherwise. Now, at 71, her life was a collection of routines. Early tea, morning news, a short walk to the park, and evenings filled with the low hum of the television. It was a small life, but it was hers, and she had made peace with that. Until the phone call came one October afternoon, breaking the stillness like a glass shattering on tile. "Mom," Rachel began, her tone sweet and hurried, the way people sound when they are about to ask for something big. "Listen, I need a favor." Evelyn's stomach tightened. Rachel's favors were never small. "You know my in-laws are coming from Chicago for Thanksgiving, and the apartment is just too cramped for everyone. Could we, maybe, have dinner at your house this year? Just one night. You know how you love hosting." Evelyn smiled faintly at the word love. It wasn't that she hated hosting, it was that every gathering meant weeks of preparation, cooking for hours, cleaning for days, and being invisible while everyone else enjoyed themselves. "How many people, dear?" she asked softly. "Only 12, Rachel replied, too quickly. "Well, 13 with you, but it'll be easy. I'll help, of course." Evelyn glanced at the old dining table that had seated generations of Harpers, its surface faded from years of polishing. 13 people. That was no small favor. "I don't know, Rachel. My knees. Oh, Mom, don't start that. You always say you're fine." Rachel's tone hardened just a bit, like steel beneath silk. "It's just one meal. I'll buy everything, I promise. You just have the bigger kitchen. And nobody roasts turkey like you do." Evelyn swallowed her protest. It was the same flattery that had worked every time before. She pictured Rachel's perfect smile, her busy life in the city, her husband Michael who barely acknowledged her. Evelyn wanted to say no. She really did, but the old reflex kicked in, the one that had guided her through motherhood like an invisible chain. "All right, dear," she heard herself say. "Just one night." Rachel squealed in delight. "You're the best, Mom. I'll send you the list of things we'll need." "Love you." The line clicked before Evelyn could reply. She sat there, phone in hand, staring at the faded wallpaper. She didn't feel loved. She felt conscripted, like a soldier called to duty, once again, in a war she never signed up for. The days that followed passed in a blur of errands and quiet resentment. Evelyn found herself at the grocery store buying cranberries, butter, flour, and everything else on the long list Rachel had texted her. There were requests within requests. Michael's mother wanted a gluten-free stuffing, his father only ate white meat, and one of Rachel's friends was vegan now. "Just make something simple," Rachel had written, as if that meant anything. Evelyn's cart overflowed, and by the time she reached the cashier, she realized the total was more than her entire week's pension. She hesitated only for a second before sliding her card. After all, she thought, Rachel had promised to pay her back. When she got home, she placed the bags on the counter and leaned against the wall, breathless. The kitchen that had once been her pride now felt like a stage on which she performed a role she no longer wanted. As she unpacked the groceries, her eyes landed on the photograph stuck to the fridge, Rachel at 10 years old, smiling with a missing front tooth, frosting on her cheek from the birthday cake Evelyn had stayed up all night to bake. The sight made her chest ache, a mixture of love and loss so tightly woven she could no longer tell one from the other. She thought of how it had always been like this, Rachel asking, Evelyn giving. From the first school project that needed last-minute supplies to the endless favors in adulthood, loans that were never repaid, weekends sacrificed to babysitting, holidays taken over by other people's needs. Somewhere along the years, Evelyn had stopped being a mother and become an endless resource, a person to draw from until there was nothing left. That evening, she sat by the window and watched the light fade from the sky. The trees outside had turned a deep orange, leaves falling like small goodbyes. She thought about the upcoming dinner and felt an invisible weight settle on her shoulders. She was 71, her hands stiff from arthritis, her legs slow and unsteady. The idea of hosting 13 people felt absurd. And yet, a small voice inside her, the same one she had ignored for years, whispered that this wasn't about a dinner. It was about a lifetime of being told that her needs came second. Later that night, the phone rang again. Rachel's voice was cheerful, full of energy. "Mom, so I was thinking, maybe we can use your good china this year? The one Dad bought for your anniversary. It'll look perfect with the centerpiece I picked." Evelyn closed her eyes. The china. She hadn't touched it in years, not since Thomas died. It was the last beautiful thing he had ever given her. "Rachel, those plates are special." Oh, Mom, don't be silly. They're just dishes. You always say they're for special occasions. What's more special than Thanksgiving with family? Family. The word landed like a stone in her chest. Family was supposed to mean love, care, and respect. For her, it had come to mean obligation, silence, and exhaustion. "All right," she whispered. "Use whatever you like." When the call ended, she sat in the dim kitchen, her heart thudding. Something inside her began to shift. Not anger, not yet, but something close to awakening. She realized that for most of her life, she had mistaken obedience for kindness. She had thought saying yes meant being a good mother. But maybe, she thought, maybe being a good mother also meant showing your child that you are a person, not a tool, not a servant, not an afterthought. That night, as rain began to fall softly against the windows, Evelyn found herself unable to sleep. She sat at the edge of her bed and looked around the quiet room. The air smelled faintly of lavender and old books. On the dresser stood a photo of her and Thomas on their wedding day, both of them young, smiling, full of hope. She wondered what he would say if he saw her now, tired, lonely, used. She whispered into the darkness, "When did I stop being me, Tom?" The house gave no answer, only the steady rhythm of the rain. By the time Thanksgiving week arrived, Evelyn's house was spotless, though she could no longer remember when cleaning had stopped being an act of pride and become an act of desperation. Every corner gleamed, every cushion was fluffed, and yet she felt none of the satisfaction that used to come from preparing her home for guests. Instead, there was only a hollow ache, a quiet dread that grew stronger with each passing hour. On Wednesday morning, Rachel arrived with Michael, both of them carrying boxes of decorations and a loud sense of ownership. "We thought we'd make it festive," Rachel announced, placing a plastic wreath on the table without asking where it belonged. Evelyn stood at the doorway, watching her daughter move around her house as if it were her own. "That's nice, dear," she said, forcing a smile. Michael barely nodded in her direction before opening the fridge and inspecting its contents. "You didn't get sparkling water," he said, frowning. "My parents only drink that." Evelyn's lips parted, but no words came out. Rachel laughed. "Oh, Mom never remembers those little details. It's fine, I'll grab some later." The comment was light, even affectionate in tone, but it hit Evelyn like a slap. Never remembers. Never enough. The day passed in a blur of chopping, stirring, lifting, bending. Her back ached, her knees throbbed, but she kept going because that's what she had always done. She heard Rachel talking on the phone, laughing about something, not once offering to help beyond setting the table. By evening, the house smelled of roasted turkey, garlic, and butter, the sense of tradition, of effort, of care. Evelyn looked around the kitchen, every counter covered in dishes, and felt no joy. She felt invisible. Later that night, when the house was finally quiet, she made herself a cup of tea and sat by the window. Outside, the neighborhood glowed with warmth. Families arriving, children's laughter, windows lit like tiny golden squares. Inside, her world felt cold. She thought of all the years she had spent preparing meals like this, believing that love could be cooked into food. She had done it for Thomas, for Rachel, for every guest who had ever sat at her table. But who had ever cooked for her? Who had ever asked what she wanted? Her gaze fell on the small cabinet in the corner, where her passport lay hidden among old papers. She had renewed it 5 years ago, thinking she might travel somewhere, maybe take that cruise she and Thomas had once dreamed of. But then Rachel had needed help with a down payment, and the money was gone. Someday, she had told herself. Someday, when things calmed down. But things never had. At midnight, Rachel walked into the kitchen, phone in hand, scrolling. "You're still awake?" she asked absently. "You should rest, Mom. Big day tomorrow." Evelyn nodded but said nothing. Rachel didn't notice her silence. She never did. She poured herself a glass of wine, sipped and sighed. Michael's parents can be a bit particular. Don't take it personally if they make comments, okay? They're just like that. Evelyn blinked. Comments? About the food, or the house, you know. They just have high standards. Evelyn looked at her daughter, really looked at her, the woman she had raised with love, the child she had once held through nights of fever, the teenager who had cried over her first heartbreak. "Rachel," she said softly, "why do you think it's okay for them to judge me?" Rachel frowned, confused. "What?" "They're not judging you, Mom, don't be dramatic." Dramatic. The word hung in the air, sharp and familiar. Evelyn smiled faintly. "Of course," she murmured. Rachel kissed her cheek quickly, already distracted. "Anyway, tomorrow will be perfect. You'll see. Good night." When Rachel left the room, Evelyn remained seated, her tea gone cold in her hands. She thought of her life in fragments, her mother's voice telling her to be patient, her husband's laughter, Rachel's first steps, the first time she'd ever been called selfish for wanting a quiet weekend to herself. It all came together like a single long sigh. She realized that the problem wasn't Thanksgiving, or even Rachel. The problem was her. She had trained everyone to believe her time was endless, her energy bottomless, her love unconditional no matter the cost. She had said yes so many times that the word no had become foreign to her. But as she stared at her reflection in the darkened window, something shifted again. Not anger this time, but a kind of resolve. For the first time in decades, she wondered what would happen if she simply didn't show up for the role everyone expected her to play. The thought frightened her, but it also made her feel strangely alive. Morning came gray and cold, the kind of chill that seeps into old bones and lingers. Evelyn woke before dawn. Not because she needed to, but because years of habit wouldn't let her sleep in. The house was still. The turkey sat prepped in the fridge, pies already baked, vegetables chopped and ready. Everything was perfect, or so it would appear. She stood in the kitchen doorway, wrapped in her old blue cardigan, and watched the quiet space. For a moment, she imagined what would happen if she simply didn't go through with it, if she didn't roast the turkey, if she didn't set the table, if she just walked out the door. The idea felt both terrifying and thrilling. As the first light crept through the curtains, she moved slowly to the cupboard, poured herself a small cup of coffee, and sat at the table. The air was still, peaceful. She realized she couldn't remember the last time she had sat down to enjoy her morning without thinking about someone else's needs. She sipped the coffee, letting its warmth fill her chest. And then she did something she hadn't done in years. She allowed herself to imagine her own future. Not the version that revolved around Rachel's phone calls or last-minute favors. A life that belonged to her. The sound of the front door opening broke her thoughts. Rachel's voice echoed through the hall, bright and commanding. "Mom, you up? We're early." Michael's parents wanted to come by to see how things are going. Evelyn stood, her heart beating faster. "Of course," she said automatically. But as they entered, she saw the way Rachel moved, directing, correcting, adjusting. "Oh, Mom, you didn't set the table yet? We'll have to hurry." Michael's mother, a tall woman in pearls, gave Evelyn a polite but distant smile. "This is such a charming little house," she said, her tone making little sound like pathetic. Michael's father grunted something about the drive. Rachel fluttered between them, apologizing for the cold, offering coffee, explaining that her mother was still getting everything ready. Evelyn watched the scene unfold like someone observing a play she no longer wished to star in. She felt small and invisible, but also, for the first time, separate. She looked around her own home, filled with strangers giving orders, and something hardened inside her chest. Rachel turned to her. "Mom, could you get started on the gravy? And maybe heat up the rolls?" Evelyn didn't move. "Mom," Rachel repeated, impatience creeping into her tone. Evelyn's voice, when it came, was calm but firm. No. The room went still. Rachel blinked. What do you mean, no? Evelyn looked directly at her daughter, really looked at her, the way one looks at a painting they've stared at for years but never truly seen. I said no. I'm not cooking. I'm not serving. I'm not hosting. Rachel laughed, a sharp, nervous sound. Mom, stop joking. Everyone's here. I'm not joking, Evelyn said, her tone steady. You wanted a dinner, Rachel. You planned it. You invited them. But you didn't ask me, you told me. And I agreed, because that's what I've always done. But not this time. Michael's mother shifted uncomfortably. Michael cleared his throat. Maybe we should just... Rachel cut him off. Her face flushed. Mom, you can't do this right now. People are here. Evelyn smiled faintly. That's precisely why I'm doing it now. She took a deep breath. For 70 years, I've cooked and cleaned and given until there was nothing left of me. I thought that's what love meant, doing everything for everyone else. But love without respect isn't love. It's servitude. Rachel stared at her, speechless. For the first time, Evelyn saw confusion, even fear in her daughter's eyes. You've always said yes to me, Rachel whispered, as if the world no longer made sense. Evelyn nodded. And that was my mistake. I taught you that my time, my home, and my life were open for the taking. I thought I was helping you, but I was teaching you how to use me. Silence filled the room. The clock on the wall ticked loudly, the only sound. Then, without another word, Evelyn turned and walked to her bedroom. She closed the door behind her, her hands trembling, not from regret, but from the weight of freedom. She sat on the edge of the bed, heart pounding. Outside, she could hear Rachel trying to explain to the guests, her voice cracking between anger and disbelief. Evelyn felt a pang of guilt, sharp but brief. It faded quickly, replaced by something else, a sense of peace she hadn't known in decades. She looked again at the small cabinet and the passport inside. The thought came suddenly, clearly, as if whispered from somewhere deep within her, leave. Not forever, maybe, but for once, leave for herself. The world outside her window seemed wider than it had in years. She didn't know where she would go, maybe the coast, maybe that little art town she'd read about in magazines. It didn't matter. What mattered was that she could. The house was quiet again by the time the sun began to set. The guests had left, some awkwardly, some with muttered complaints. Rachel hadn't said goodbye. Evelyn could still hear the faint echo of her daughter's angry voice hours earlier, demanding to know how she could do this, how she could embarrass her like that. How could she ruin Thanksgiving? Each question had cut deep, but Evelyn hadn't answered. She had nothing left to explain. For the first time in her life, she realized that she didn't need to justify her peace. She sat by the window again, the same place she had sat so many times before, but tonight everything looked different. The street outside glowed under soft lamplight. The air was still, carrying the faint scent of fallen leaves. The silence no longer felt heavy, it felt like space, open, waiting. Evelyn took a slow breath and looked around her living room. The decorations Rachel had brought still hung awkwardly on the walls, glittery and false. She rose from her chair, her joints aching, and began to take them down one by one. Each ribbon, each plastic wreath, each piece of forced festivity, she placed them gently into a box. As she worked, she realized that she wasn't just cleaning her home. She was clearing her life of everything that didn't belong. When the last decoration was gone, she made herself a cup of tea and sat down with her old photo album. The pages were yellowed, corners frayed. There she was at 20, standing beside Thomas on their wedding day, his arm around her shoulder, both smiling like they owned the world. There she was at 30, holding baby Rachel, her eyes bright with exhaustion and love. She turned the pages slowly, watching the years pass before her eyes. Her face changed. Fewer smiles, more lines, more shadows. She realized that somewhere along the way, she had stopped appearing in her own story. Tears gathered but didn't fall. They were soft tears, not of sadness but release. You did your best, she whispered to the photograph. You loved as hard as you knew how. The phone rang, sharp and sudden in the quiet. She hesitated before answering. Mom! It was Rachel. Her voice sounded different, smaller somehow, brittle. I shouldn't have yelled, she said quietly. It's just you surprised me. I didn't expect you to say no. Evelyn's heart softened, but she stayed silent, waiting. I guess I just thought you liked doing these things. I used to, Evelyn said gently, because I thought that's what mothers were supposed to do. But it stopped feeling like love a long time ago. There was a long pause. Evelyn could hear Rachel breathing on the other end. Then, softly, Rachel said, I didn't mean to make you feel used. Evelyn closed her eyes. I know you didn't. That's the thing about habits, dear, they start small. A favor here, a little help there. And before you know it, they become chains. You didn't put them on me. I put them on myself. I don't know how to fix this, Rachel whispered. Evelyn smiled faintly. You don't have to fix it tonight. You just have to see me, not as your mother who never says no, but as a woman who still has her own life to live. Rachel didn't reply right away. Then, very quietly, she said, I think I'd like to know that woman. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then Evelyn said, Good night, Rachel. Her voice trembled a little, but it was steady enough. We'll talk soon. When she hung up, the house felt lighter, as if the air itself had shifted. She went to her bedroom and opened the small cabinet once more. Her passport was there, along with a few envelopes of cash she had saved over the years. She ran her fingers over the embossed cover, feeling its quiet promise. Tomorrow, she decided, she would go to the travel agency downtown. She didn't know where she'd go yet. Maybe somewhere by the sea, somewhere with salt in the air and strangers who didn't know her story. She packed slowly that night, not because she was in a hurry, but because she wanted to feel every moment of it. The sound of the suitcase zipping, the soft fold of her clothes, the quiet hum of the lamp beside her. For years she had packed for others, for Rachel, for family trips, for guests. This was the first time she had ever packed for herself. Before she went to bed, she stood by the mirror and looked at her reflection. Her hair was thin, her skin soft with age, her eyes tired but alive. Hello, she whispered to the woman in the mirror. It's nice to finally meet you. When dawn came, the sky was pale and wide. Evelyn stepped outside, locking the door behind her. She carried one small suitcase, enough for a week, maybe more. The street was empty, but she didn't feel alone. She felt free. As she walked toward the bus stop, the wind lifted the edges of her scarf. She thought of all the years she had given away, all the dinners, all the silences, all the small pieces of herself she had traded for approval. And then she thought of the word that had changed everything, no. How small it had sounded when she said it, and how powerful it had turned out to be. The bus arrived with a soft hiss, and she climbed aboard. The driver nodded, and she smiled back. Where to, ma'am? He asked. Evelyn looked out the window, watching the sun climb over the roofs of the houses, and said, I'm not sure yet. Anywhere that's mine. As the bus pulled away, the town grew smaller in the distance, the street, the park, the little house with the peeling white fence. For the first time in her life, she didn't look back. And somewhere deep inside her, a quiet voice, the same one she had silenced for 70 years, finally whispered, Welcome home.